Hello, welcome to the Online Graduate Research Forum for Fall 2015. My name is Tanisha Campbell, your presenter. I am a graduate student in the Masters of Science in Interdisciplinary Studies program in the Department of Occupational, Workforce, and Leadership Studies. The title of my research study is A Review of Racial Tension Between Minorities and Law Enforcement Officers. I was excited to pursue this research study to investigate why there is tension between law enforcement and minorities after watching countless amounts of news footage in 2014 and 2015 of events with racial tension between law enforcement and minorities being the target. Racial tension between law enforcement and minorities has seen a rapid increase over the past years. Different races and how fairly each race believed they would be treated by law enforcement is what drew me closer to this research study. Current figures show 74% of whites, 46% of Hispanics, and 37% of blacks all believe they would be treated fairly by law enforcement officers. For the research design, I decided to use secondary data sources such as newspapers, television news channels, journals, politicians, and ethnic groups that cover racial tension between minorities and law enforcement officers, and how each media sources felt. And then I'd used content analysis between each of the data sources to collect data for my research. I used a qualitative method and an unobtrusive method because I felt like these methods would reduce the amount of bias due to controversy this topic already presents, and I felt like each method would suit my research project perfect. There were major findings in this research paper. The first finding was, even if all police bias was eliminated, this would do little to reduce the amount of African Americans killed by law enforcement officers. This finding is interesting because the solution that is presented in this issue is to eliminate all police bias, but this finding says that even with the elimination of police bias, racial tension between law enforcement and minorities will still be present. This raises the question of why would there still be racial tension even if police bias was eliminated? The answer is African Americans encounter law enforcement officers more than any other race. Law enforcement officers are present in neighborhoods of low socioeconomic status, and so are minorities. With this fact, one can see that African Americans will encounter with law enforcement officers more even if police bias was eliminated, which would still make no difference in this case. The next finding is Hispanics have a different view than African Americans when it comes to racial tension and racial equality. When doing research, I came across a few research articles showing that Hispanics feel more close to whites in their views when it comes to the tension between law enforcement and minorities in contrast to blacks. In a survey, when blacks, whites, and Hispanics were asked how much progress towards racial equality has been made over the past 50 years, 48% of whites said there was a lot that changed. 43% of Hispanics felt there was a lot of change. In contrast to blacks, who were 32% of blacks felt there was a lot of change. These numbers were interesting because Hispanics felt more closely to whites on this issue in comparison to blacks, even though the Hispanics are minorities and may deal with this issue more than whites. The third finding is African American men are no longer the primary subject to tension between law enforcement and minorities. African American females are also at risk of this issue. 50% of America's females' prison population is white, and 21% is black, and black females are between 1.6 times and 4.1 times more likely to be in prison than white females. When it comes to younger African American females in school, African American females are said to be suspended from school more than any other female race. This finding was interesting because throughout the research paper, the researcher only ran into cases that involved African American men in law enforcement, not women. For future research, interviews might be done with African Americans and police officers to see their view of tension between each other. This future research would be helpful because it would better reflect how law enforcement feel and how minorities feel about this issue. Next, interviews specifically done with minority police officers to see their views. This would be helpful to get insight on how a minority police officer feels about racial tension between law enforcement officers and minorities. Lastly, interviews done with all races represented to see their views on this issue would also be helpful in future research. In future research, these items that were listed could not be done in this research project due to time constraints. The author intends to submit a manuscript of this research study for peer review to the publication, the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology. On the YouTube page below, please indicate your anonymous preference for this study by clicking on one of these two icons, thumbs up or thumbs down. Also, please post your comments or questions in the YouTube comment section below. I will respond to your inquiries posted between November 17th through December 8th. Thank you for watching my research project.